The title of my talk is Do Scientists and Engineers Perceive Gender Barriers in STEM? Before I begin my talk, I would like to take a moment to introduce to you the International Network of Women Engineers and Scientists, where I am currently serving as president. The International Network of Women Engineers and Scientists, better known as INWES, is a global network of organizations of women in STEM. There are 50 organizational members like TWIST of Taiwan and KWSC of Korea, and university members like the University of Warwick in the UK and Dongseo University in Korea. I was introduced, I am currently the Executive Vice President of Dongseo University, and I represent my university in INWES. We also have individual members, and altogether INWES represents over 250,000 women in STEM from about 60 countries worldwide. And our vision is to build a better future worldwide through full and effective participation of women and girls in all aspects of STEM. The history of INWES goes back to 1964, when the first International Conference of Women Engineers and Scientists, otherwise known as ICWES, has been held in New York, USA. At that time, there was no formal organization to oversee the conference, which since then has been held every 3 years. In 2002, the Continuing Committee for ICWES became a formal organization with the support of UNESCO, and this is the beginning of INWES. In 2004, INWES was incorporated as a not-for-profit corporation in Canada. In 2008, we became an official NGO partner of UNESCO, and in 2017, obtained a consultative status of the UN Economic and Social Council. Now, the reason why I wanted to introduce INWES first is because networks play an important role in tackling the gender imbalances in STEM. This is well described by UNESCO in their website by the following statement: as a solution to tackle the issue of gender imbalances in STEM, UNESCO aims to support and promote networks of women scientists in various scientific domains and regions, such as, among others, INWES, the International Network of Women Engineers and Scientists. Now, let me begin my talk. I would like to start by raising questions on the issue of gender equality in STEM. Gender and STEM are words that used to be a topic of interest to only women in science and engineering in the past. Over the past years, though, recent past years, they have become more of a general topic, and the importance of science and technology and the importance of having talented men and women enter these fields are recognized worldwide. However, the facts remain a bit frustrating still. What you see in this slide are facts on women and girls in STEM. And this is data from the US, but I think in many countries you will see similar situations. I would like to bring your attention especially to this red box here, which shows the situation of what we call the leaky pipeline. Out of 100 women with a bachelor's degree in STEM fields, towards the and you will see only 3 remaining in the fields after 10 years. In engineering, the percentage of women in the US is only about 20%, but this tends to decrease when they enter the workforce. Now, is this then a matter of gender equality? Ironically, countries that are economically better off and more what they consider gender equal do not have more women in STEM. Considering that STEM careers are generally more secure and well paid than other careers, we have to come with the question as to why do women avoid STEM fields? And this is considered a paradox. A professor, one of the professors from the UK, and I quote what he said in this slide, that when women are free of economic burden, they tend to choose STEM less. Well, STEM field is a choice that women it's a choice that women make when they have less economic opportunities, was the explanation that he had. Now, thus in countries like the US, and I'm sorry, I keep giving you the example of US because this were the data that I found to be a little more clear. Girls choose STEM less. it does not seem to be a matter of competency. In other words, it's not a matter of women being less competent, but it seems to be more of a choice. Now, I say that it is not a matter of competency because even though there are less girls choosing STEM fields, when girls do the test, like when they attend tests like the advanced placement test in STEM, their competency seems to be similar to that of boys, meaning that they don't see a difference in the actual competency of women having less ability or capabilities in the STEM fields. The fact remains that gender gap exists in STEM. In fact, the gap has been quite persistent. And earlier, Professor Chu has already mentioned that there are less than 30% women in R&D fields, in STEM fields worldwide, and this is based on the UNESCO Institute of Statistics data. Now, because there are less women in STEM, the bias and gender stereotypes tends to remain. And it even drives women away from STEM careers, leading to what we call the underrepresentation of women in STEM. And this tends to be sort of like a vicious cycle. At this point, the first question that I would like to raise is, why are there less women in STEM in more economically wealthy societies? This is otherwise known as the gender equality paradox. Now, the second question is related to the nature of STEM fields being what we call rational. I think everyone will agree that STEM fields are rational fields. And thus we tend to assume that scientists, technologists, mathematicians, and engineers are rational as well. Now, are we, or are they? And I think most of you will agree that it's not really the case. The fact of the matter is that the environment surrounding those in STEM are not really gender equal. There are gender barriers and gender biases to exist. But why do they exist? This is something that I would like to address hopefully in the future if I have a chance. But today, I would like to focus on this question. Do the people in STEM fields, do the scientists and engineers, do they perceive, do they actually experience, do they actually know of the existence of the gender barriers? To find the questions to this question, we at INWES, more specifically the APNN, the Asia Pacific Regional Network, began a long-term study. And I would like to share a few of the results with you today. Now, the study was conducted by the Asian Pacific Nations Network of INWES since 2014, and it was initiated by KWSC with funding from the Ministry of Science and ICT of the Republic of Korea. Countries that participated are members of the APNN, which include Australia, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Mongolia, Nepal, New Zealand, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Taiwan, and Vietnam. Now, these are the titles of the reports from 2014 to 2018. It was a 5-year study initially, and in 2019, a 5-year comprehensive report was published. The topic over the 5 years remained on the gender barriers in STEM among members of the Asian Pacific nation of INWES. How we define gender barrier is shown in this questionnaire that we distributed to do the study. We have segmented gender barriers into 3 subgroups. One is the perception of discrimination. Second is the experience of discrimination. 3 is the gender role stereotype. So these 3 categories, which included sub-questions, were measures to find out whether the respondents did perceive gender barriers. The career outlook, policy needs, and equality concepts were also included in the questionnaire. Now, let me share with you the result of the 2018 study. This study is important because the respondents for this this 2018 study particularly were on young men and women in STEM. Now, when we say young, we tried to categorize to limit the study of the respondents to those in the age range of the 20s. So most of them were students, either in undergraduate or graduate levels. When we first started the study, we assumed that the younger generation would perceive less gender barriers than the older generation. People my age tend to tell students that we used to live times which were a lot more difficult than the younger generation are living now. And sometimes we even force them to thank the senior women in STEM for providing them with a better environment especially in the STEM fields. Well, the results of study was a little surprising for us, meaning the study revealed that what we thought or what we assumed was not right. And here are what we found. The summary, you will see a summary of the results from the study. Gender differences in responses were quite significant, meaning that the way female students perceived gender barriers and how their male colleagues perceived this was quite different. Equal work distribution, equal appraisal, equal pay for equal work were all perceived differently. Work-life balance was more difficult for women. Gender barrier in labs were more significantly perceived by women, and male students tended to be more optimistic than females toward the future career of the female students in STEM. Female had tended to have more progressive attitudes towards gender role stereotypes, and women respondents generally rejected the patriarchal power structure. The significance of this study, as I mentioned earlier, is in the fact that the study was focused on the younger generation. And the fact that we found out was that the gender barrier remains quite intact. The significant difference among the respondents, meaning the gender difference. So this is another gender gap that we have seen through this result. And the APN women perceive equal work distribution and equal appraisal and equal pay for equal work to be the most serious problems. Among experiences of gender discrimination, the highest responses was on women having trouble or having to leave work due to marriage, pregnancy, or childcare. So based on this study, we concluded that this calls for a need for a strong policy measure to eradicate any discriminatory practices women have to face in relation to marriage and childbearing, and to ease their tension for maintaining the work-life balance in APN and countries. So what I showed you right now is the overall result of all APN and countries. Now, I would like to give you results for the Korean respondents. Before I give you the results, let me just give you a little background of the Republic of Korea. And as far as education is concerned, Korea has progressed remarkably over the years in terms of tertiary education, as shown in the OECD report in 2011. Since the Korean War in 1950, over the half a century, a remarkable growth has been observed in the tertiary education and attainment. Korea, after the Korean War, was considered a low tertiary education attainment country, but within about a half a century, it became one of the countries with a very high tertiary education attainment. The next slide shows the Human Development Index for Korea over the years of 1990 to 2019. And what the HDI values show a remarkable increase, meaning that the HDI index has improved greatly. And this includes the life expectancy, education, and the GNI per capita. And these are some of the numbers that you see that have changed over the years. So Korea's economy has improved immensely. The GNI per capita increased by about 256.8% over 29 years. Women are well educated and life expectancy is long. However, how about the gender gap? Do gender barriers exist? Has there been a change in the gender barriers or the gender gap? Now this slide shows the gender gap, and this is for Korea, and this is a 2020 data. And you will see that the GGI values have not improved much. A very, very slight increase from 0.616 to 0.672. The economic participation rate of women is still very low, 0.481 in 2006, in 2020, 0.555. So Korea still ranks low in GGI. It ranks 108 out of 153 countries based on the data in 2020. And although there has been slight improvement in terms of political power, empowerment gap or economic participation or opportunities or in health dimension or education dimensions, we still are quite low in rank in terms of the gender gap. Now, let me show you some data pertaining to the STEM field in Korea. The ratio of women in STEM degrees have increased a lot. And I say a lot based on mainly the sciences. In engineering, things are a little different. But as I have shown you earlier, as far as the tertiary education attainment is concerned, the education level of Korea has remarkably increased, and this is also true in STEM fields. Although engineering field will still need more women to enter, compared to other countries, I think Korea is not doing that bad in terms of the ratio of women in engineering field even. So there's a significant and steady increase in the educational attainment in STEM fields in Korea. The problem is after graduation. So employment or women in STEM in the work field, actually, the data do not look very good yet, and we are hoping that we will see an improvement in the future. Low percentage of newly hired women in STEM, 28.9%. Overall employees in STEM field, 20%. Promotion and management position, 17.4, 10%. Project managers, research project managers, 10.9%. And the gender share of the research project manager of over 1 billion won, 6.6%. So we need to increase women as research project managers and also in leadership positions. So based on that, we have seen a steady increase in in women in STEM in the workforce, and also as far as education is concerned, I think we are doing very well. Now, why are there still less women in the STEM fields? Is a question I come back to, and this applies not just to Korea, but I guess to all over the world. And based on the study that we conducted with the APNN, we have found that there was a gender gap in the gender barrier perception among our young men and women in STEM fields. So these are some of the examples or some of the responses that have been obtained. And one thing that I would like to show you that was quite significant is that young men in STEM tend to feel less the gender barrier that their female colleagues perceive. So the question was, rather the study was organized so that the women answer whether they experience or whether they perceive the gender barriers. The questionnaire for men was different, meaning that they were asked whether they feel that the women or whether they recognize the gender barriers of their women, the female colleagues. And to our surprise, there was a big gap in how the male students perceived how their female colleagues were experiencing the gender barrier. Young women feel that they are not equally appraised for their work. They do not have equal opportunities getting jobs and receive less pay than their male colleagues. And this is one question that also showed the gender gap. This is actually one question where the gender gap is not that big, but still you will see that the blue color is the responses of women, the red color is the responses of the men. And you will see that when they are asked, girls and boys are equally encouraged to choose their majors in STEM during their education period, women tend to disagree more than their male colleagues.
A more significant difference is seen in questions like these, asking about the gender barrier experience. So whether they experience the gender barrier or whether the female students in STEM experience gender barrier were asked, and women answered were scored 2.51, whereas the male, when asked the male students, sorry, it was 1.84. And Korean men do not seem to agree with the women on the gender barrier experience. And this is overall true for most of the APNN countries, except for Vietnam, Sri Lanka, and Taiwan. Okay, so I come back to the question that I raised earlier, or at the beginning of my talk. Do the scientists and engineers perceive gender barrier? To be more specific, do the men and women perceive the barriers alike? And I think we can all answer this. I left a blank page because I think everybody may have a different opinion, but I think most of you will agree that yes, there is a difference in the way men and women perceive the gender barriers that women are experiencing, and the fact that the gender barriers are perceived by the scientists and engineers. So then what can we do to close this gender gap? What can we do to overcome the gender barriers? Well, I don't think there is a magic solution yet at the moment, but I think we can keep trying through collective wisdom. And this is where I think networks can play an important role. In other words, when we tackle the problems together, I think we can come up with a solution faster. So one suggestion is to have the young men and women in STEM join networks that can set the gender norms in STEM. And two, for our leaders in the STEM fields to support, or not just those in the STEM fields, but to our leaders in most of our countries, to support the networks in an effective way of closing the gender gap in STEM. Networks can conduct collaborative research like what we have done, and they would reveal actual numbers. And these numbers can convince or can become a basis for policy development. So for future women in STEM, I think I would encourage them to join the networks to get support. And what I would like to ask our audience is that our future women or our young women in STEM need to be heard of, and they need to be supported, because gender barriers do exist, although in a different form from the past. I would like to end my talk with some acknowledgements. My colleagues who have conducted the study together were Professor Kung-Ju-Bok Lee, Dr. Yang-Hee Kim, Dr. Hae-Young Park, and I would like to thank the Ministry of Science and ICT of the Republic of Korea for the funding and for the immense support from KWSC, from all our INES members, and of course, our very valuable APNN members. Thank you very much.